In the 1930s, the entire world experienced the Great Depression, which was further worsened by the outbreak of World War II. During the war, all governments implemented food rationing to ensure that everyone received a limited supply of food. The interesting part of this rationing scheme was that all citizens received the same food allocation. This meant that even those who were less fortunate economically could enjoy foods like meat and consume more protein. This system also had a positive impact on new mothers, as it reduced infant mortality. Although not all foods are rationed, such as fruits or vegetables, supplies of these two ingredients are often limited, especially onions, tomatoes, and fruits of foreign origin. At that time, the government encouraged people to grow their own food in gardens, or on their land, known as Dig for Victory. During this historical period, there were significant changes in people's eating habits. People couldn't choose their preferred foods, and had to make do with the limited rations they received each week. And here are the types of foods consumed by people during World War II. In the autumn of 1942, the British government introduced the nation wheatmeal loaf, which utilized every part of the wheat grain. This bread was not only healthier, but also less wasteful. This was particularly important because during wartime, most of the flour imported by the merchant navy was viciously attacked by Nazi German submarines, which destroyed 4,700 British ships and killed more than 29,000 sailors. Wasting bread during the war was considered a serious offense. In fact, a woman was fined £10 for feeding bread to birds. With strict policies and the innovation of the nation wheatmeal loaf, bread was exempted from rationing. According to Charles University, the Soviet Union faced severe shortages after the German invasion on June 22, 1941. To address this situation, the government implemented a hierarchical rationing system, with factory workers at the top. However, both men and women who work in factories received only one bowl of cabbage soup per day. In addition to factory workers, the Red Army also consumed cabbage soup, but with much better nutrition. Soldiers received 800 to 900 grams of bread, 100 grams of fish, 30 grams of macaroni, 140 grams of grits, and 20 grams of second-class wheat flour. In Japan, during World War II, the country was severely affected by food shortages, especially of fish, fruits, and vegetables. During that time, children were typically given porridge, which consisted of tofu, wheat gluten, pumpkin, and eggplant. Children even said that the porridge they ate was dry and tasteless. Due to the lack of food supplies, Japanese children suffered from malnutrition, leading to stunted growth. In contrast, Germany implemented rationing towards the end of World War II. At the beginning of the war, German citizens tended to enjoy a more varied diet compared to other countries. This was due to Hitler's plundering of other territories, such as Ukraine, known as the breadbasket of Europe. While Germans had a relatively more pleasant diet, the local population in Ukraine was forced to consume inadequate and unusual foods, such as rats, crows, and birch bark. Due to starvation and the consumption of uncommon foods, around 100,000 people died. Germans began to feel the effects of food shortages in 1944. At that time, they began to live on bland foods, such as bread, potatoes and jam. Meat rations were also cut from 750 grams per week to 250 grams per week in 1945. In the United States, many people did not like the idea of consuming hearts, tongues, livers, and brains, as they are considered peasant food. To change public perception, the National Research Council categorized organ products as variety meat and suggested that Americans consume them occasionally. Other organizations also jumped on board to encourage the approach. In January 1943, Life magazine described variety meat as good, plentiful, highly nutritious, and added that if prepared properly, it would be one of the most delicious dishes. This gentle, euphemistic approach worked, making organ meat popular and common by the end of the war. Organ meat soon became a food consumed by patriots, not a food consumed by the poor. However, this trend did not last long after the war ended. Although during the war, the government and institutions promoted organ meats as good and necessary foods, this message did not have a long-term impact, because visual propaganda still emphasized high-value cuts of meat, like steaks and roasts. As a result, people tended to revert to their usual food preferences after the war ended.